like $2,000 hit for or something, probably less than that. But he had a decent hit for League of Legends.
Yeah, well, it was a bright spot on our team for yesterday. A couple plays that I was high on, like Gronk, big goose egg. Ronald Jones gets hurt in pregame warmups. Yep. It's just hard to predict stuff. Wolford going down on the second series of the game, and then Goff comes in, kind of changes, the entire strategy of that game. There were some weird things that just happened that kind of threw all my lineups off.
Yeah, I mean, it really sucked in some of the showdown lineups that I had built for them. I had Goff in there. I spent most of yesterday drinking beer, playing League, and watching the TV out the corner of my eye. And I saw that we were updated that Wolford was starting, so I went in and I put him in everywhere that I had Goff, and I even put him in a couple spots that maybe I had like Metcalf or somebody like that. Thinking like, hey, he's going to run the ball, he's going to be a valuable part of this team, and then I see that he goes out after like 2 plays, and I was
like, All right, well, why don't we jump right into this Sunday slate? We don't have to worry about the 6 games today, so we'll just focus on the 3-game slates. How do you feel like going? You want to go game by game, position by position?
I think we should just go position by position, knock these out. Again, I don't think that any additional analysis on the games versus what we did earlier in the week is going to be relevant. I think it's more or less, let's just look at the ownerships. Let's, think about that. So to kick it off, we've got the quarterbacks here. Lamar Jackson at 30%, Ben at 20%, Drew Brees at 15%, Tannehill and Mitch Trubisky around 12, 13 apiece, and Baker all the way down there at 9%.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised at Ben being number 2 on the list a little bit. I guess it's because Pittsburgh's running game has been so terrible this year. Lamar is obviously in my mind the easy pick, but at that ownership, I won't be playing as much as I want of them. I actually found myself playing a lot of Baker and Drew Brees, which goes good with that ownership, I guess. And in a good contrarian play, I threw in a couple lineups. Everybody's going to be high in Derrick Henry. I threw in some lineups, completely faded them out, and went with a Tannehill passing attack. I can totally see Baltimore just taking away the run, even though I know Derrick Henry earlier this year ran like 200 yards on him. Just taking Derrick Henry out, and then Tannehill has to throw the ball. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's something to definitely, if you want to build a lineup that has that, I think that's definitely a way that you can go. I think going back to what we said earlier in the week, though, in some ways you have to kind of look at what raw points are going to be, and is anybody going to even touch a Derrick Henry on a bad day type of raw point situation. Yeah. I have him projected around 21 points, ceiling obviously a lot higher, but I feel he probably gets 100 all-purpose yards pretty easily. Maybe finds a way into the end zone, and if you get that, I mean, it could be better than the rest of the running backs in this 3-game set. So he's pretty valuable at that point, even if he doesn't necessarily hit the value that we're looking for. But yeah, I mean, we're going to get into his ownership, and it's going to be massive. I agree with you, though. I think that there are some advantages to playing guys like Drew Brees or Baker Mayfield or even Ryan Tannehill at that lower ownership. Certainly, I think I'm going to approach it much like I did yesterday, where about half my lineups are a little bit over are going to be that premier quarterback. So it was Josh Allen yesterday for me. And I'm just going to try and double that ownership, and then, get some of these leverage spots. Maybe I'll be a little bit under the weight on them versus the field, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So running backs, let's get into this. The ownership here, No surprise, Alvin Kamara and Derrick Henry lead the way, right around 50% each. David Montgomery is up at 40, James Conner at 26. Let's see, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt about 20 apiece. J.K. Dobbins at 17, Gus Edwards at 17, Lat Murray at 9.
See, now that surprises me. I am not on Connor at all today. I don't like that situation at all. And I really like Dobbins today. I find myself playing a lot of Dobbins, a lot of Chubb. Henry and Kamara, obviously, I'll fit them in where I can, but they're pretty high priced. And I do have some concerns on Kamara coming back from COVID. I mean, he actually was positive for COVID. Haven't really heard, how it affected him or anything. And he's going up against a fairly tough Chicago defense. And Breeze has been chucking the ball a little bit. So I don't know. I'm not playing as much Kamara as the field. I'll definitely be under there. And I don't have any Montgomery either. How do you feel about him?
So the reason that Connor is where he is, like in my model, he actually grades out as the highest rated running back. And I think that's just more so because he's only 5K. It's just easier to get to that number for you and fit in some other pieces. And I think that's going to drive his ownership up a little bit. He's been performing pretty close to that. You're looking for almost a ceiling to get past that value, and you're not getting a lot of raw points at that point. So you do kind of look for that. You kind of hit on it for the concern with Kamara. Definitely, we've seen some of these athletes come back and kind of lose a little bit of a step and not necessarily be where they were when they left. Myles Garrett being one of those guys who's been pretty vocal that it was tough on him. Maybe it wasn't for Kamara, but even so, the Chicago defense, aside from several games where they just, allowed huge numbers to running backs, I guess it was against Atlanta, Detroit, New Orleans being one of them, and Minnesota, they've been pretty good. We're talking less than 24 points allowed each one of those times. Now, the other aspect is that there's going to be Michael Thomas. That game against the Saints, I don't believe Michael Thomas was there. And Michael Thomas is going to take some of the catches away. Yeah. It's just going to happen, and possibly even some of those touchdowns. I don't think Michael Thomas scored a touchdown all year, so this would be a great time for him to get in there and score some touchdowns. You've got my opinion on Montgomery. I think Chubb is still a good play at 6,700. Guy scores touchdowns on a regular basis. I am not interested in Kareem Hunt, but going back to Chubb, he scored a touchdown in every game with the exception of the Eagles game, dating back to when he returned off of the IR. And even before that, he had 4. So 12 touchdowns in total this year. I think I mirror your like for J.K. Dobbins. I think his ownership is depressed on the basis that he's still in somewhat of a timeshare, but I feel like this guy has kind of started to hit his stride in such a fashion that he's kind of like what we saw Jonathan Taylor emerging during the season. We saw it with Dobbins to a little bit less of an extreme. He's gotten touchdowns dating back, in his last 6 games. So he's been utilized in such a fashion that even if he doesn't get the 100 yards, which he's only done twice, he's a guy that is going to find the end zone. Gus Edwards, super cheap. That's probably what's driving his ownership. He's still getting enough touches at 4,400 that I think you can put him in there, but he's lost kind of that touchdown scoring end zone role that he had kind of towards the middle of the season. And as such, I don't think I'm going to find my way to much of him, but he's viable at that 4,400 more so than like a Mark Ingram or a Benny Snell around the same price. I like Gus Edwards at 44 before I take Kareem Hunt at 48, unless I'm looking for just like massive upside, because I think Kareem Hunt has a much lower floor as evidenced by his production, but he does have I would say a bigger ceiling than Gus Edwards in the optimal situation.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. And I love the other thing I love about J.K. Dobbins is he's getting the carries. It's a run first offense, and he's $3,000 less than Derrick Henry. He's $2,000 less than Kamara. So good to fit in. I have a lot of Nick Chubb, Dobbins lineups. I just love that combo today. Hopefully it pans out. It's like my strongest take of the day, and those didn't work out yesterday, so I'm crossing my fingers today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing too is that you just don't see Lamar Jackson rushing the ball into the end zone as much as you did last season. So it makes his running backs a little bit more viable. There were a couple games this year where he did have more rushes in the red zone, but I mean, we're talking 1 to 3 rushes. I mean, dating all the way back to the first the first Pittsburgh game. That was the last time he saw more than 3 rushes inside of the red zone. So they're giving it to the backs. I think they trust him a little bit more than they have in years past, and that just bodes well for Dobbins. So
and I think it's some wear and tear on Lamar too, right? You get down in that end zone where they can stack the line easier. Run your backs into it, not your prize quarterback.
Sure. Okay, so here's the thing. So let's look at wide receivers now. This is going to be kind of interesting. So they're just kind of packed in here. I don't think that there's a lot of leverage one way or the other. You got Michael Thomas at 41, Corey Davis and Allen Robinson, both, low 30s, along with Juju, Deontay, Marquise, and then, a step below that, you've got Anthony Miller, A.J. Brown, Jarvis Landry, and Claypool in the mid-20s. And then there's a huge fall off to like Sanders, Higgins, DPJ, Des Bryant, some of these guys. I mean, the one that stands out for me, obviously part of this is going to be his price, but, A.J. Brown is a guy here that absolutely has a higher ceiling than probably anybody on this list when he goes off. And, he's middle of the pack in terms of ownership. So, I mean, I'm attracted to that. And I know that if you're building a fadeable Derrick Henry lineup with a Ryan Tannehill path thrower, you probably have the money to go ahead and go get A.J. Brown in that.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at a couple bounce back places too. I think Allen Robinson's an interesting play, despite all the terrible things that he did to me last week. And that's not his fault. That's Mitch Trubisky's fault to some extent. But also, a surging Marquise Brown, Deontay still at 62 with that crazy market share. I think the injury concerns are gone. Why are we not why are we not just rostering Deontay unless you think that this is going to be a game where Pittsburgh's offense is just going to look flat like it has at certain times this year? I just for one would be surprised if that happened, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah. Wide receiver is kind of the hardest and the easiest at the same time because other than AJ Brown, they're all pretty much priced the same. I think that's why you see that ownership being really close together. So it's more or less where you can fit the pieces, maybe who your quarterbacks is and who you're stacking. My only real strong take here is Chris Claypool's 2 best games of the year came against Cleveland. So I kind of, that's where he scored his touchdowns. For some reason, he just plays good against them. So I was kind of leaning there a little bit if I wanted to go to the low end. Sprinkling a Corey Davis at 4,800 if I need to save money. I'm not interested in Sanders at all with Michael Thomas being back. But all these, they're all playable. And I love you calling the A.J. Brown. Yeah, my Derrick Henry fading starting Tannehill lineups, he's in them all. I mean, his ceiling is just massive if Tannehill's going to start launching the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you just want to fit it into your team. And I mean, again, for some of these guys, for them to be successful, it seems like the guys on the other side of the ball need to be successful. And that's where the game stack theory has, emerged and has been pretty on point for the most of the year. But again, there's just not a lot of places here that I think you can get a ton of leverage. I think that Jarvis Landry number just feels a little bit high to me. I think he's probably going to be the lowest owned out of all these guys, maybe the exception being Claypool. So that makes me a little bit interested, especially since the weather in Pittsburgh is going to be pretty good. It's going to be cold. There's no wind. There's no precipitation, just cold.
Yeah, so what's Landry been doing here? 51 yards, 61 yards, 52 yards. So, I mean, he feels to me he's touchdown dependent. And what we've seen from Cleveland is mainly Chubb running it into the end zone when they get down there.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the yards, but you can also go back through November, and his target numbers 11-5, 2, 11, 10, 9, 8, 6. I mean, these are pretty extreme target numbers. So, the opportunity is being funneled his way. Some of the games that he had, that were not as good, and that was an 11-5 and 2, those were bad weather games with Vegas, Houston, and Philly. So, he is, obviously to reach a ceiling, going to need a touchdown, but in half of those games since that bad weather game against Philly, so you're talking 5 games, he has 3 touchdowns. It's a 50% touchdown rate, or a little bit higher. So yeah, I mean, I'm good with that, especially if you're pegging Cleveland to win this game, which I am.
Yeah, I am too. I do think they win this game.
Well, if you think that they win this game, then you really need to have a Jarvis Landry or a Nick Chubb in most of your builds, I would say.
Yep.
At least the builds that are in line with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and for me, that's Chubb. I really like Chubb.
Yeah.
Yeah, you touched briefly on Allen Robinson. I don't have a lot of them. And I don't know if that's just in my mind a little recency bias or a little bit of New Orleans defense or Trubisky just not being Trubisky just being Trubisky. Do you have any feel about how he's gonna do here? He's the number 1 receiver in Chicago. That's who Mitch throws to, but
yeah, so
I don't know.
I mean, when I look at this, I look at like the New Orleans defense and what they've done against wide receivers. And, they've had a couple shutdown games against Philly being one of them and against the Broncos when they had no quarterback. But, aside from that, they're averaging somewhere between like 40 to 50 points allowed for, opposing wide receivers. And with Mooney out, where is that going to go? So that's the point is I think that Robinson is going to get a healthy enough target share that he could put up 15 to 16 points and then have a much higher ceiling. Just like who else do they have? I mean, that's what you have to start looking at.
Yeah.
And where are those points going to go? Anthony Miller, Cordell Patterson. I mean, I don't anticipate either of these guys putting a large chunk of points on the board. They certainly will be involved. And I think Anthony Miller is kind of interesting because until Mooney's emergence, he was receiving pretty high target share, but that was with Nick Foles. That wasn't Mitch Trubisky. So that, could play into that. And certainly Cole Kmet and, Jimmy Graham are going to be part of that offense as well.
Yeah. And so with that, let's roll into the tight ends. Cause I do like Kmet a lot, especially with Mooney out and at his price.
Yeah, I think Kmet is a guy that's been getting a tremendous amount of looks from Mitch, and I think that having Mooney out is only going to help that. I mean, you date back his last 5 games, 7-7, 2-6, and 8. Of course, that game that 2 right there is where I rostered him heavily. So that's how these things go sometimes. But when we look at the ownership, Mark Andrews is going to be the highest owned, above and beyond almost anybody, around 30%. You've got E. Brown and Jonnu Smith at 19 and 15, Austin Hooper at 12, and Cole Kmet down there at 10. So, especially given that information, I think Hooper, Kmet, and E. Brown are super interesting, a lot more so than the Mark Andrews personally.
Yeah, and those 3 you named are really who I have in 99% of my lineups. Some sort of combination. I would say they're probably evenly spread out. If I'm going high end on those running backs, I have a couple of Henry Kamara lineups. I got Kmet in there to save money.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose that's kind of that. I mean, Kmet, Ebron. I mean, those are kind of the ways that you want to go. I mean, Mark Andrews is fine if you have the money left over, but you're paying $1,500 to $2,000 more for a guy that has arguably similar production set of Ebron. I mean, if we look on the year, real quick here, 96 targets, 62 receptions, 740 yards, and 7 touchdowns. When you think about what made him really good, last year, was a lot of multiple touchdown games. And he had that early in the year, but he just hasn't been able to recapture that. Part of it is an emergence of J.K. Dobbins and some of these other guys, and Marquise Brown having a better end of the year. But you look at that, and you compare it with a guy like Eric Ebron for $1,500 less, and you're getting 91 targets, 56 receptions, 558 yards, and 7 touchdowns. They're pretty similar. If we're looking at just a 1-game sample, I don't know if that price difference and the ownership altogether makes it somewhere that I want to go to, Mark Andrews.
Right. So another tight end that I'm targeting a little bit of is Jared Cook. And this is because Breeze has been going to him now. A lot of that was because Michael Thomas was out. But Chicago is the 3rd worst defense against tight ends on the season. And depending on how you feel about Kamara, if he's going to have a big game or not, I found myself doing a Breeze, Thomas, Cook stack.
Sure. Running it back with like a Komet or Allen Robinson or something like that if you want to. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm just not feeling Sanders. I know he's had a few good games, but it just doesn't seem like he's ever been really in sync with Breeze this year.
Yeah, and I mean the thought process that you might have on something like that is some of his bigger games has come. This last game, Week 17, was he needed all of these catches to get there for his bonus. And there's no Michael Thomas, and it's I agree.
Yeah,
there was no running backs either. So
right. All right.
We've been pretty good on defenses.
Yeah.
The Rams were the defense that kind of broke the slate yesterday. They were the ones you needed to have. Buffalo certainly weren't the guys. I don't know.
You called the Rams yesterday.
Well, I thought at the price it was the way to go. And I ended up with them in a fair amount of my builds, so that was exciting. I think that today, you have a couple different options. I think Baltimore, New Orleans, and then either one of the late games are going to be ones that you can utilize in your lineups. I think Cleveland is going to give you the most leverage. I mean, I could just look at the ownership and stop guessing. So Tennessee, for some reason, is going to be the highest owned at 22%, followed by Pittsburgh at 20%. I think that has something to do with the price. Baltimore, for some reason, is the lowest at 11, and Cleveland's at 13. So I think I'm going to find myself figuring out ways to push in that Baltimore and that Cleveland pair, and maybe a little bit of the Saints. But I think I'm fairly confident, unless these builds take me a different way, that I'm not going to go to Tennessee at 2,200.
Yeah, I actually found myself with a little bit of Tennessee, so I understand. I wasn't expecting to be that high owned, but what that is that's people playing Henry and Kamara together with another high end quarterback or a high end receiver, and that's the only way you're going to fit that in. But I mean, for the most part, just my gut feeling is the Saints are in the best position to have a good day on defense, and I really like Cleveland. If Pittsburgh's offense stalls out again, I can see Cleveland being the highest scoring defense on the slate. So I actually, if I needed a cheap defense, I tried to get the Browns in more than Tennessee if I could do it.
I agree.
Well, that was fast and quick. Any last thoughts on this slate? I was talking pre-show yesterday. I was super confident in my lineups. They didn't really pan out. Today I'm a little nervous about my lineups, so I'm hoping for a big day.
Well, it's the last 3-game slate that we're going to get, except for I think next week they'll probably have a 4-game 2-day slate, and then
probably
it's pretty much over at that point unless you want to play the showdown. So, hey, it's been a good year. So we've got one more slate after this, basically, to kind of break down. I don't think that we'll be doing much for the 2-game slates. I guess we can, but it'll be quicker than this.
Yeah. No, we'll probably do one more first sip next week, and then maybe we can do a couple of spot videos or articles on the showdowns for the last round.
All right, sounds good. Well, hey, good luck out there today.
All right. I will talk to you later. Thank you.
Later.